you want to open this one up?
Joo, mä voisin... Okay, siis do I open this up?
Yeah, sure, you can start.
This episode is about... It's about series of podcasts what we have done with my son Matthias about Finnish history and mostly 1900 something and kind of important figures in there. And now we started this with the Civil War and went on to 30s and continuation of war. But I think now the more we actually studied the subjects and refreshed our own ideas and knowledge base about the thing, we kind of met this guy called Carl Gustav Emil Mannerheim, and Finnish general and later field marshal. And actually, he turned out to be a very, very interesting man from what he did in life, and so it's intriguing to have a short episode of Mannerheim himself, just as a person and career and whatever happened in there. Not that much politics. I don't want to mix that much politics into this because politics is a certain level of factual things, but I like to be more personal. Like really expose who was Mannerheim, because he was surprisingly interesting guy.
Mm-hmm. And who was he to us? Like, you grew up in sort of 60s, 70s Finland, and there was a whole political climate at that time, and there was obviously, but a very unique political climate, and much of it was not that friendly to Mannerheim. But I think that's changed, and I think he's a highly valued, admired, respected figure these days because he really did do a huge amount of good for Finland. He kept Finland independent. He ended up fighting or commanding in how many wars? I think in his lifetime 5 wars in total. So he was
Civil War, Winter War, and Continuation War.
Yeah. And before that, he was in the Tsar's army in Russia, and he fought in the Russo-Japanese War in like 1904 or whatever that was.
Yeah.
And then World War I. He was fighting in World War I. So this guy had a long military career. And
yeah, five wars. That's there's not many guys who have that much.
No, and some wars as brutal as World War I. Like World War I fighting for Russia. I mean, that's Jesus. And then on top of that, I mean, this guy was kind of an adventurer. Like in 1908, I think it was. It was a year and a half or something that he went on this big journey. He was asked, as part of his work for the Tsar's army, he was asked to do this reconnaissance journey into China. He went and he pretended to be some kind of ethnographer that was there to study Chinese culture, but really he was basically on an information gathering mission for the Russian military, and he wrote a long report about, I don't know, kind of military technology of the Chinese and use of opium in China and certain trade practices
and fortifications and all kinds of things there.
Yeah.
What the things that are actually pretty important to know when two states have a conflict and it may break into war. So he was a plain spy.
He was a spy on top of the rest of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. All this is, and he really did a full service, so to speak. He was in his early 30s when he was in Tsar's army, and then he was 77 when he retired from Finnish army. So not only it was colorful history, but it was also super long.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do just a brief overview of the guy's life. I mean, we've already alluded to the significance of what he's done. We've talked about the Civil War and Winter War and Continuation War and all this struggle for independence and maintaining independence in Finland, and how important Mannerheim was in Finnish success on all those fronts. But let's just introduce his his life, just sort of briefly, main points. I mean, he was born in Finland and wound up in cadet school in Finland when he was a teenager, and he ended up doing, I think, some kind of cavalry training in Russia. Again, just a few years after that, kind of late teen years, early 20 years, and then transitioned right into the Russian army and moved up the ranks there. He ended up, I think, commanding a cavalry training program. And
when he moved to Finland, to independent Finland, and acted as a Finnish colonel, his rank was lieutenant colonel.
Mm-hmm.
So then he climbed up the ladder, and of course then super, actually not even rare, but unique. Unique military rank was, when he retired, was field marshal, and Finland has never had. Finland has ever had only one field marshal, and that is Mannerheim.
Right. Okay, Dad, you skipped a few steps ahead of me there, so let's just cover a little bit of where he was at.
Of course, but I was just, that is kind of history about what military steps mean. Yeah, but only there is Mannerheim was now he is and he has been surveyed as a most significant Finn ever. And but in the 50s, 60s, 70s he was a controversial figure, of course, because he was a white general, and we had this communist red coup d'etat. No, if you want to say coup d'etat, that, but that's what they tried to do, because Finland was of course very young country, hardly even a year old independent democracy, but that's what Russian supported Reds tried to do. They tried to overthrow the government and take the power. And then, when I now look back in 60s and 70s, I have some hardline communists. I have had, and not very many anymore is living, but I had some really hardline communists in my family, big family, and one of them used a nickname Bloody Gustav. Like there is Bloody Mary, then there is Bloody Gustav, just because he was a white general, and which doesn't make sense in my thinking today. It's just war is war, and war has this kind of tendency to be very violent stuff.
Yeah, I mean there was the issue of these executions of red soldiers, and I've seen it argued that even a lot of red non-combatants who are kind of thought of as potential threats, because Mannerheim during the Civil War, he did give permission, or even he gave permission for the soldiers on the ground to perform executions basically at their own discretion of red soldiers, and that ended up including some non-combatants, just young males that were communist sympathizers but not necessarily at arms yet, and so a lot of this is viewed as butchery and injustice, and probably rightly so. But it's from what I've read, it's kind of controversial or unclear at this point how much Mannerheim actually knew about that and accepted that practice that was going on. These kinds of on the ground executions that were happening. Although he did give permission, but or gave the order to perform these against the combatants, but how much he knew about what was really going on apparently is not totally clear. But
same thing happened the other way around also. So Reds had their kind of termination guerrillas who went from house to house, and if they were something more than hands-on working class communists, they killed them. But those figures are, my understanding is that those figures are relatively low. Of course there was hatred. I'm not saying that there wasn't. Of course there was hatred on both sides. But the more the historians have dug around of this thing, it's actually those figures are lower than they in 50s, 60s, 70s. People kind of imagined that they were. The most casualties actually happened in POW camps, when the Reds were cornered and taken to POW camps, and those figures were pretty high.
yeah,
The death rate in those prisons.
I mean, especially obviously most of the prisoners were Reds because the Whites won, and I think most of those deaths, the camp deaths happened after the war was done, and it was like 10,000 plus or something.
Oh yeah,
like
it was compared to those squadrons or whatever you call them, those death squadrons on both sides, Reds and Whites. Those figures were in thousands, not 10,000 plus. But I understand. Of course, I understand the hardline communists in 60s and 70s. Like, I don't agree, but I understand why they called Mannerheim Bloody Gustav.
Yeah.
Because it's always like that. That's what history depicts, and so
to whatever degree he is morally culpable for that, and should rightly be called a butcher and all these other things that he gets called. I'm not sure what degree that is, but whatever it is, he still should be regarded as just an absolutely integral figure in maintaining Finnish independence, and therefore kind of just a savior. He should be admired still for the things that he did, even though he may have a major stain on his record.
And one thing also is that if any one of us kind of looks at our personal history, I myself, like, the worst stupidities in my life I have done in my late 20s or early 30s. And that is kind of, it's a young officer's. I kind of I little bit I forgive Mannerheim because of that. He was young, and and the time was different. Time was way different. Of course it's wrong, and in today's standard it would be, most probably it would be a war crime.
Yeah.
But then 20s came and 30s came, and time goes, and afterwards the old, so-called old Mannerheim, there's no doubt that he is by far the most important single person who affected Finnish maintaining its independence in the world, in the World War II, and doing so secured the the development of the democracy and what Finland is today. There is no doubt in it, because one measure. You can, of course, measure it in all kinds of units, people and their life and career. But one measure is that how your enemy is referring to you, or kind of giving any kind of assessment, historical, and that Stalin, who by far, of course, Stalin was Mannerheim's enemy, number one, and Stalin pretty much respected Mannerheim, and so did Hitler, and so it's hard to think that Hitler and Stalin would respect the same person. It's because they were like blood enemies, like I can't even describe it. They really hated each other. But they both have in history writings, they both have pretty high respect for Mannerheim, and I think he was. Because Finnish role in continuation war and even Winter War, but definitely in 1944 when the war ended, it really has been a tightrope. It has been amazing, like walking between two worlds, and gosh, you need to have some sort of super talent as a negotiator and a personality, and if you can take your country out of that and maintain its independence, it doesn't happen just like click. You have to have some special skills, and I think he really had those, because it's as big things, and we kind of, when we think of negotiations between states and all kinds of, that's a big thing, and but it all comes down to relatively personal features and characters. So it is a different thing when you respect the person at least in some way. It's the whole setting for the negotiation is different. Like the opposite, like if both sides hate each other, like synthetically, like they would pretty much rip their each other's heads off.
Yeah, exactly. Like Stalin's respect for Mannerheim may have been at least one major deciding factor in Stalin's decision not to pursue conquest of Finland after the continuation war was done. He could have kept pushing. It would have been at a huge cost for the Soviet Union, but they could have done it, and they could have taken Finland, but they didn't. And I think in part that was because they just admired the Finnish resolve and the Finnish the Finnish motivation to maintain their independence, and Mannerheim's competence at achieving all that.
And once again, of course, in previous podcast we have mentioned it, but I like to mention it again. And let's kind of remind you, our dear listener, that Finland was the only country in Europe that maintained its independence after Second World War. Every other country was more or less annexed to Soviet Union.
Yeah, you mean all of the other the bordering countries of Soviet Union, all these. Yeah, they all lost their independence, and they got it back finally in 1991 when the Soviet Union went bankrupt and dissolved. But that's a heck of a difference, where we're talking about, what is that, 4.5 decades under the old Iron Curtain or not. And let me tell you, it was better not to be under the Iron Curtain.
There are some aspects kind of of Mannerheim. He was, in a way, it was kind of, there's a little bit of there is some kind of room of humor in this. Like, Mannerheim was born in Finland, so he was, by birth, he was Finnish. Then he went to China and Tsar's army or whatever, and he was fluent in Swedish, because his Finnish family was speaking Swedish.
Yeah, they were Swedish.
But his old family was from Germany. And
the name itself, Mannerheim, is German, right?
It is a German name, yeah. So, but he was fluent in Swedish, German, English, and French, and a little bit in Finnish. So that guy spoke 5 languages, and least and least he was fluent in Finnish, which he was kind of a military leader and later on president and whatever. Right, that's kind of funny.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting, this tension around Mannerheim, this kind of the controversy around him. Like there's he's honored all over the country. There's the kind of the main road in Helsinki, which is the capital of Finland, is called Mannerheim, which just means Mannerheim Road, and there's a big statue of him in downtown Helsinki. But if you go to Tampere, which we talked about when we were talking about the Civil War, how Tampere was kind of a red city in general. There's a statue of him, but it's tucked away in the forest. It's nowhere. It's nowhere visible.
Eastern peripheral forest.
And what's really this is such an interesting moment for me. So I didn't know much about any of this history until we started doing this podcast, and I started reading about it and talking to you about it. But in 2016, I was in Finland for 6 months. I had taken a kind of gap half year from school and work and decided to figure things out and go kind of reacquaint myself with my roots and family and stuff. So I was living with grandma, dad, your mom, for a few months in that eastern periphery region, Linnanmaa of Tampere, and I was doing a lot of running on some trails there during that time, and one day I was running down these trails and I stumbled across this clearing. This is about 1 kilometer from grandma's house. I stumbled across this clearing and there's this statue of Mannerheim there, and it's totally it's in the forest. Like there's not even a building in sight where this statue is, and I had no idea why this statue was here. I was confused, but kind of like awestruck in a way, and amazed that I had come across this statue of Mannerheim. And I didn't know that much about Mannerheim. I knew he was significant because he was honored all over the place in Finland, but I did not piece together at all why this statue was off here in the forest. But now I understand that it's because Tampere was this red capital of Finland, and they did not look at Mannerheim so fondly. So if a statue had to go up, it went up in the middle of the forest.
So, like compared to Helsinki, like Mannerheim statue, riding statue with his favorite horse, is right in the city central square, and big, huge statue. It's not even. But I think then there is in Tampere. It was kind of. It looks like that it has been taken kind of into safety, so that somebody is not destroying that statue. So it has been taken to eastern suburb,
right?
And within woods there is no buildings.
Yeah. I read one article from a Finnish newspaper that said, the article is a little bit old now, but it's not super old. It's like 2004 or something, that was saying that the statue gets vandalized at least once a year. Like somebody comes with red paint and paints lahtari on it and and whatever.
Bloody Gustav.
Yeah, bloody Gustav, the butcher. Yeah. So, but how much that is an indication of the general feeling around Mannerheim, it doesn't tell you much, because it's all it takes is one person to go and vandalize a statue, so it doesn't tell you how the overall sentiment in Tampere is these days toward him, but still, it shows you that there's a bit of controversy.
I think even in Tampere he's by today's standard, I think he is respected already, because the generation what had these nicknames, Bloody Gustav and this kind of things, that generation is now pretty much gone. There is not many individuals left anymore. So, no, of course, because the time goes, and I was just, was it yesterday or so? I just happened to calculate things like 1940, like our Winter War. God, it is 80 years already from Winter War. Yeah. So that a person who was still a warrior, or a soldier in Winter War, has to be like 98 or 99. That is even possible. So
yeah, those times are gone now.
But still, history still matters. It's history still matters, and history is by far very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's just as valid to say that it's a whole 90, it's a whole 80 years ago, but it's also valid to say that that's only one lifetime ago. That's one human lifetime ago.
Absolutely.
And it absolutely touches the world today.
Yeah, you can look at the timeline in both ways. That it's 80 years already, but then you're gonna get only 80 years. Actually, like Matthias said, it's only one lifetime. Because most of the people now live in their 80s. So it's like it's not that much. Yeah, I think this. And then when the 1944 and then the Lapland War, where Soviet Union pressured us to kick out German troops from Finland. So that was 1945 at the age of 77. Then Mannerheim, or was it 78? Who cares? He retired and he had health problems already, and he moved to Switzerland and lived up to, I think it was 1954 or 53, somewhere like that. And and then there was this super interesting thing. What actually in this podcast program that we have done now, actually I didn't know that, but at that 2004, Mannerheim was voted among all Finnish people. And he was by far the most significant Finn ever existed. And no doubt he is, because I don't think our country wouldn't be the same without him.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting coming back to this theme of the political tension between left and right that defines, I mean, it kind of defines the political life of so many countries, but in Finland, the way it's panned out is really interesting. I mean, Mannerheim was this kind of right-leaning guy. He was definitely far from the far right, but he was right-leaning. He was pro-free market. He himself was, a kind of a lord type of guy, an aristocrat. I think he liked fine things. He was a friend of the Tsar in Russia, and when the far left had their revolution in Russia, he was strongly opposed to that, and he wanted to get the heck out of there. And so he went back home to Finland, and anyway, so here's this right-leaning guy that's kind of the savior of Finland, that gave Finland its start, basically. He was pivotal. It was a pivotal figure in allowing Finland to have independence in the first place. But I think arguably where Finland is now, and the political and social structures that Finland is so admired for now, are largely the result of kind of left-leaning politics, the Social Democrats, and a strong social support network, and free education, free healthcare, and all this stuff. But none of this is the result of any extreme movements. The radical left got beat down by the whites in the Finnish Civil War, and the radical right never got a start in Finland. And it's this tension, this dynamic tension between like right-leaning and left-leaning, but overall you might call it kind of a centrist path that got Finland to where it is. I might be being a little bit taking some liberty here in interpretation, but I think that's more or less right.
But one kind of bits and bytes of the history is that, like, Mannerheim's attitude and how do you say it, recognition or whatever, because Hitler suddenly 1943 visited Finland as the history says that it was a surprise, because Mannerheim turned 75 on that year. So and Hitler came brought a huge big Mercedes supercar for Mannerheim and all kinds of. But like Mannerheim was pretty kind of. He was friendly, sure, but he was kind of lukewarm towards Hitler. He wasn't really respecting the guy. What history says, he was lukewarm. Of course, Hitler was at the time was big boss. Yes, sure, but Mannerheim wasn't kind of buying the thing what he was driving and the hatred and all the bloodshed and butchery and stuff like that. Mannerheim wasn't. I think he genuinely he wasn't respecting. But it was a war, so and Hitler's Germany helped us a lot in the war and to keep our independence. Yeah, so of course he took it as such. But at least what I've learned that Mannerheim was pretty lukewarm to Hitler. He wasn't that much of a. Definitely, he wasn't a Hitler fan. And in general, also like. Mannerheim definitely wasn't far-right guy. He was actually detesting far-right in many ways. So Mannerheim was pretty much what the Finland is now. Like it's those extreme reds and extreme whites and that's gone already. It's not there anymore. So we are. As the whole Europe has changed, like, but I think Mannerheim is a good example, kind of a emblem of that political viewpoint. That it's extremes are not very workable.
Yeah.
They seem to turn into wars and all kinds of shit. The basis has to be in real democracy.
Yeah, wars and dictatorships. I mean, I can't think of an extreme left political system that actually took root, that actually gained power and took power over a nation and wasn't a totalitarian nightmare. I mean, this applies both to extreme left and extreme right. They all always end up as totalitarian nightmares.
It's when you want. It's kind of interesting that history has so many examples like Argentina and Chile. They were both extreme right-wing dictatorships. Okay, the Soviet Union, extreme left dictatorship.
Yeah, Mao's China,
extreme left. Yeah. They have a tendency to turn out to be dictatorships.
Yeah, because I feel if you go extreme enough, I feel like I mean, I'm not a political expert, but it seems that if you go extreme enough in either direction, it's almost synonymous with imposing some kind of social order in a top-down way. There's no way to have an extreme government, either left or right, without limiting people's freedoms, without interjecting your views on people by force. There's no other way to do it. And your system on the people by force. And
in that way they end up in the same place. Pure absolute dictatorship. So no, thank God we don't have many of those anymore left. Okay, there is some North Korea or something.
Yeah.
Okay, I think this pretty much covered Mannerheim, and of course a colorful guy has a huge admirable career and all that. Of course, you can do books, and of course there is books.
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting though. I'm pretty sure at least I couldn't find one. I'm pretty sure that there is not an English language biography on this guy, which is a shame.
Yeah, hey, that's interesting.
Yeah, I wish there was.
There probably is Swedish and Finnish, but it might be that there is no English manuscript.
I couldn't find one, but.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. We could write it.
Yeah, sounds like a big job, but maybe we'll get to it, and if not, hey, you listener, maybe you're a historian. Go write about Mannerheim. A really interesting guy. I mean, yeah, all those the wars and I would say a pretty kind of a nuanced character. He's got his own ideas. He's not wedded to any particular extreme philosophy or anything. He's willing to abandon Russia when the leadership changes because he doesn't believe in the new leadership. He had ventured through the East Asian countries repeatedly. He went on that spy mission for the Russians in like 1908, 1909, and then after the Civil War, the Finnish Civil War, and before the Winter War, there was a 20-year gap there when he's in his 50s and 60s, and he was off adventuring in Asia again. He went on hunting trips and befriended. Was it at that point that he befriended the Tibetan king?
Tibetan. I don't know who's the leader of Tibet.
I don't know.
Is it emperor or president? It's not president. But anyway, he went to tiger hunting. Tiger hunting with Tibetan leader.
Yeah. But yeah. And he had a couple of kids in there and all that. We didn't talk about his family life at all, but
no, not in this context.
But anyway, super interesting guy. Okay, I think I've said everything I wanted to say.
One thing I like to add in here is that the popularity of Mannerheim in today's Finland is it's kind of interesting because like there is at least 3 restaurants where the cocktail, so the beverage list contains Mannerheim snaps, which is like Marskin Ryppy in Finnish, Mannerheim snaps, and it is a frozen vodka with a cherry in it. Like it's frozen, like it's minus 30 degrees, minus 28, something like that, and then you drop a cherry in there. And of course the cherry is immediately frozen. And that's Mannerheim's schnapps. And then in Helsinki in the city center there's a restaurant called Vaakuna. I don't know what it is today, and they have Mannerheim menu, and it's a very special. I remember it's 12-course menu, and they were really, there's every single Mannerheim's favorite food on that list, and you can still order it in that restaurant. You can go there and say, I'd like to have Mannerheim's menu, and that's what comes. There's so many things in that.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, you want to wrap it up there?
Yeah, I am. Whatever I was when I was 25 or 19 or whatever, I am an absolute fan of Mannerheim.
Yeah. I came onto this whole story of Finnish history late because I didn't grow up in Finland, but it is my roots. I love the country. I love my family there, and I speak the language. I love the language, and I'm truly honored to have inherited Finnish heritage, and I, from the bottom of my heart, send a big thank you to Mannerheim.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, but one thing also has to be, I have to mention this, that you are born 1991, which was the New Europe. New Europe, when Soviet Union went into bankruptcy, New Europe was born 1991, the same time that you.
Yeah, it's a cool year to be born.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I think that's it.
Okay, thank you for the listeners, and we will have more interesting.
Additionally
interesting stories in the future, and yes. We just try to show there is this part of history. It is so. Although there was some extreme elements, but it's very, very interesting to see how they function in today's world, and attitudes and viewpoints and all kinds of.
Yeah, and like you said, it's so interesting to realize that history is not. It's often not best understood in these kinds of broad terms of economics and conquest. And I mean, those things matter, but often to really understand it, you need to focus your attention on individual characters and how they interacted with one another. You know, I mean, just how a guy like Mannerheim saw the world and how he was respected by a guy like Stalin, and on all these things, these are defining factors of how things unfolded. And
absolutely, they individuals, they actually they have a huge effect on the overall history. Like why Germany was what it was because there was Adolf Hitler. Why Soviet Union was what it was because there was Joseph Stalin. And it has a huge importance.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.